Very good.
Okay.
Mhm.
That was, you just popped in the frame.
Okay, well, I won't do that then. Okay. First of all, I'd like sort of a broad-brushed description of the mission of the Argonne National Laboratory. What's your reason for being?
Well, Argonne National Laboratory is a multi-program energy research laboratory that essentially works on those issues that the United States has that require science and technology for solution. So there are a series of problems that this country faces. When we can define those problems in a framework that requires science and technology for solution rather than politics for solution, those are appropriate projects for Argonne National Laboratory.
Could you give us some examples?
Well, as an example, global climate change. Is it true that the climate is actually changing as a result of man-made emissions? What kind of evidence is there for it? How do we gather that evidence? And it turns out that there are such a large amount of data that's required for that we have to develop advanced computing programs in order to interpret the data. This kind of research is the appropriate kind of research for this institution, since it would be very difficult to convince stockholders of a company that that kind of information would be appropriate for any company to gather. There we're hooked up, obviously, with a number of other institutions, academic institutions, national laboratories. So that would be an example.
What about one of the things when I think of the Argonne National Laboratory, I naturally think of reactor programs, nuclear safety. That was the focus of a program you did not long ago with Curtis. I thought was very interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit. The safe uses of nuclear power. It's intrinsic to the mission here.
Well, I might start there by pointing out that at the end of the Second World War, Argonne National Laboratory was the national laboratory that was key as part of the Eisenhower Atoms for Peace program. And almost all the nuclear power reactors in the Western world trace their design back to some Argonne early design feature. The United States gets about 17% of its power, electrical power, from nuclear reactors. Other countries are continuing to construct nuclear reactors. So it's quite important that we continue to do research work aimed at developing the safest possible nuclear power that we can possibly provide. Because in the long run, nuclear power is probably the only infinite supply of power that we have, fission programs and fusion programs. So the lab does work with Russia and the former Soviet Union states, for example, in terms of developing safe nuclear power. We work on the disposition of plutonium and spent nuclear fuel. All of these are, of course, in the best interests of our citizens, and again, areas where it would be very difficult to have the stockholders of a company pay to have a company work on those things. So in essence, the taxpayers, you and I, pay for that kind of research work.
There is a reactor that found its design here that is, I believe the term is inherently safe.
Inherently safe, yes, that's right. We call it the Integral Fast Reactor Program because the step in which we reprocess the fuel back into fuel elements is integral with the reactor itself. And this was an inherently safe integrated process that was conceptualized at Argonne National Laboratory.
That kind of research, I would imagine, has got to be a key to, if you will, rebuilding public trust in nuclear energy. Suddenly, suspicion of this kind of technology and the fear that surrounds it has got to be something that you think about a lot, and finding a way to alleviate that concern.
Well, you certainly have hit a most difficult problem, and that is the societal issues surrounding the development of nuclear power, further development of nuclear power. We are in a very fortunate position in this country today because of the abundance of alternate fuel, oil, coal, gas. In fact, as you know, most of the states have taken the 55-mile-an-hour limit off driving. Cars are being built with bigger engines today. We're all driving heavier vehicles. So we're in a very fortunate position in the United States in terms of energy availability. And we are importing more and more and more of our oil, for example. I believe strongly that we should have a balanced portfolio of energy technology projects so that in the future we would be prepared to undertake the best and lowest cost energy supply options. And one of them, I think, would inevitably be nuclear.
Okay, stop there for a second. Can we address that?
Well, I'd like to get back a little bit on course here with your association with Argonne. When you came here in 1983, the institution had, from what I'm told and from what I've read, it sort of suffered a decline or loss of focus at some point. What did you find when you came here, and what was the sort of direction you wanted to take the institution in?
Well, the laboratory had suffered the loss of, it had competed for a major project, and it had not been successful in that competition. It had also had one of its major projects closed down, major facilities closed down because of a migration of that work to, excuse me.
Would you like some water? Would you like some water? I can take care of it.
No, yeah, maybe I would. Ham.
Got speed, okay. As you said, the institution had sort of lost its focus or lost its direction at that time.
Well, I'd lost a couple of major projects. And the politics had changed. There was the switch from the Carter where there was so-called war on energy, to the Reagan years. And the laboratory had been involved in what I would call a number of soft research areas, a lot of paper kind of studies, and also some major demonstration projects, and those were all canceled as we moved into the Reagan years. So the lab, as you point out, had lost a sense of mission, had lost some considerable funding, and had lost a number of people. So the morale was not good, and the sense of mission was a problem. So my objectives, my challenge, was to define a strategic sense of mission for the institution, and then to develop a set of tactical plans so that we could combine the ability to actually obtain the programs that we would define in a strategic mission sense.
How did you pick those areas? You're coming from a nuclear energy background, particle research background, I'm assuming here, and now the whole the menu is so broad. How did you pick those?
Well, remember that the lab in the 80s was about 30% nuclear. So there was another 70% of the laboratory. And we did exactly what I said earlier, and that is that we examined the national issues in order to define those issues and those programs that required science and technology for solution that we considered to be large enough and have a multi-year component to them so that they would survive whether we had a Democratic administration or a Republican administration in power. And what are those programs? What were those programs? Well, certainly remaining in the, attempting to define an appropriate position in nuclear power was one. And that led to the development of this inherently safe integral fast reactor. Another was the identification of a major facility. In this case, this $500 million construction project, which we've completed on time and I should say under time and on budget, the synchrotron, this advanced photon source, which is a huge, one-of-a-kind X-ray machine that by the year 2000 will have about $1 billion into it. And that, incidentally, as an aside, is an appropriate place for a national laboratory, and that is as a home for a large, one-of-a-kind facility. So we defined those two areas. Another area we defined as being appropriate is a position in advanced high-temperature superconductors. We still are, I believe, the largest federally funded center of excellence in high-temperature superconductivity. Another area is the area that involves the environment. Environmental problems are here to stay. They won't go away. The ability to define issues such as global climate change is important, and we define that as an area. So we did the strategic issues, and where we finally developed, wherein we finally developed what I call themes. We developed a set of themes. Nuclear theme, environmental theme, major facility theme, and then individual projects are hung off needles through the thread of the theme, so that the projects look different, but if you look at the theme, you find that they fit in with those general themes.
Well, you picked some interesting themes, too, that I wouldn't normally associate with an institution like this. I'm thinking of the Human Genome Project, for one. Let's talk about that, because that doesn't sound like one that this place would normally involve.
Well, the Institute Argonne has had for many years a biology program, and that sprang out of the work that could be traced back to the old Manhattan Project in the Second World War and our work on nuclear power reactors, because it's important to define the influence of radiation on cells, cell biology. So we had for many years a program in radiation effects on cells. We had a biology program. In the 80s, as it became apparent that work on the genome was becoming more important, and in addition to that, we, as I pointed out, were developing this super X-ray source, and as we got into that, it also became apparent that one area of interest there would be the biostructural examination, the examining biological materials using these X-rays in a way that it wasn't appropriate to do that before. And there, for example, we have 12 pharmaceutical companies that have gotten antitrust exemption so that they can focus their activities around one of these ports on this beamline. So a theme, if you will, that became apparent was a theme that involved biochemistry, biophysics, biomaterials. And the individual projects then, the Human Genome Project, Biostructural Project, are hung like threads off that theme. And it enabled us to build a critical mass of people that were involved in this general area and to hire just exceptional people into that arena. So that's a little bit of the background. I consider it, Jack, to be absolutely typical of the way a research organization that is continuously evolving and changing and generating new ideas and new projects should act. We should continuously have more initiatives than we can conceivably get funded, for example.
You come from a private industry background, years at Exxon, and I remember from your speech to the Academy, you said that you talked about bridging the gap between the research institutions and the applied science. How has that influenced your approach to the management and the administration of this place?
Well, it's important, I believe, for research work to ultimately have some societal significance. Very difficult in the early stages of a research program, especially if you're way back in a highly basic research program, to say what the ultimate impact on society will be. It becomes easier and easier and easier as more information is obtained in order to see whether this will have an impact on health, whether it will have an impact on national security, on energy, and so forth and so on. So it is important then to support the longer range research, but it's important to surround that longer range research with an understanding of what potential applications would be. Now, that means that in a multi-program institution such as ours, we should have a portfolio, long-range portfolio, basic portfolio, applied portfolio projects, and we also then should develop links to the outside world. We need to develop links to big industries, the AT&Ts, the IBMs, the Exxons, middle-sized industries, and then links to these highly entrepreneurial operations. Fortunately, the past decade has seen changes in laws that have enabled us to do that. So one conceptual in framework, if you will, that I brought because of my industrial background was the development of a whole strategic and tactical portfolio approach to the relationship between the more basic and longer range research on one hand and applied and commercialization work on the other hand. Fortunately, it fit in very well with changes in the country. So we have spun out of the laboratory a company based on high temperature superconductivity that I mentioned earlier. It's actually public and on the stock exchange. We've got well over 30 little entrepreneurial companies that have come out of the laboratory that are still in existence. And we have a large number of relationships with major corporations and joint programs that we're involved in.
How does this position the United States then in a global economy that is based on high technology research and information processing?
Well, it's important that all of the institutions, all of the technical infrastructure in this country be involved in the global, international, technological, competitive game. We are part of this country's technical infrastructure, and we are positioned really in that web. As you well know, not only do we have global financial Not only the world connected globally in a financial sense, but it's connected globally in a technological sense. So our people circulate around the world. We know what's going on in various countries around the world. We bring that information back to this country. We have relationships, sister laboratory relationships with, I think, every advanced technology country in this world. So we've got a pretty good feel of the global pulse. And we are then part of this nation's capability in that arena.
A vital asset. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of your personal philosophies as you come to this job. You began as an organic chemist, I believe.
That's right, correct.
What drew you to science? Among all the careers you could have chosen or might have chosen you, what fascinated you about this?
Well, I was always had a fascination with science from the time that I was a little kid growing up in New York. I suppose you could say the genes were chemistry genes. I had a long love affair with chemistry that dates back, I don't know, to ever since I can remember as a kid. Chemistry sets, going into chemical supply houses, conducting experiments at home. So for me, it really was not a matter of considering a number of alternate career paths, because I always had my heart, I guess, if you will, or my genes set on becoming a chemist.
What some people I talk to find a certain elegance to the whole process. Something they'll say something that emerges as being technically sweet, or almost, I guess you could say, an aesthetic in a way that's expressed in doing pure research.
Well, there certainly is an elegance connected with the uncovering of physical law, or an elegance that's connected with an experiment that only you have thought up that would identify some physical phenomenon that you are the discoverer of, or you have made a major contribution to. There is something very substantive, I believe, in doing that. And the attraction of actually doing something that is substantive in a physically real sense, I think, is very attractive and is articulated in that way.
There must have been people who, along the way, influenced you by example and the values that they imbued to you. Anyone in particular come to mind who may have set you on a specific course, or may have influenced you to a great degree?
Well, I had a high school science teacher, and she was terrific. Still remember her name, Lottie J. Greif, Dr. Greif. And she was certainly very important in my formative years. Very supportive, very helpful, very knowledgeable.
As you think about this, came through in some of your remarks to the Academy, the role of the scientist in society. We have almost become, in some ways, very fearful of technology and science, because it seems to be outstripping our capacity to understand with it or deal with it emotionally. What is the role of the scientist in society, as you see it, the appropriate role?
Well, I go back to what I said before. There are certain problems that society has that require science and technology for solutions. Whether they're environmental issues, whether they're issues that have to do with the development of a cure, potential cure for all of these diseases that AIDS or cancer or the fact that we have indeed seemed to cure polio, for example, the issues that have to do with global climate change. These are issues that can only be solved through the venue of science and technology. The quality of life, the clothes we wear, the cellular telephones, the personal computers, all of these are now considered by society to be substantive, quality of life enhancing issues that a scientist, a technologist, whether he's a chemist or a physicist or an engineer, can devote his make contributions to. Now there are areas, other areas, where there is not such a clear societal value relationship, but that in the longer term turn out to potentially have very high societal relationships. The very early work by physicists on theoretical and experimental physicists on quantum mechanics have in the long run turned out to be fundamental in the development of chips for computers. Work that goes on in terms of learning more about the universe by astronomers. Hard to say how that will ultimately turn out. But I believe that in the long run, practically all of science has a societal value. And that really is the place of science in our society.
What has given you the greatest personal satisfaction in your career? What aspect of it?
Well, I have had a very rewarding career. In my, whether I've been in an industry at Exxon or here at Argonne, my association with a very stimulating group of people. Early in my career, my contributions actually to science itself, which are rewarded. In my later career, the feeling that I've been value added here at Argonne National Laboratory, and ultimately, I believe it's the feeling that you have worked, that I have worked in areas that are important, that actually make a difference. So to say that I could pick out one particular item, I really can't do that. But to say that the feeling of working with first-rate people in important areas, getting up in the morning and knowing you can always have a conversation that's meaningful, those are important things.
You've done a lot of work with opening educational opportunities for young people.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of, I see school buses coming around this morning actually.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that. You obviously have a lot of interest in stimulating bright young people and opening them up to opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. Let's talk about your philosophy on that a bit.
Well, I think that it's a two or threefold series of opportunities for our citizens. One, it's important that the citizens of this country know enough about science or science and technology so that they can make informed decisions, so that they don't have to use a Ouija board or check the astrological tables in the morning to find out what's up, that they can actually look at a newspaper or understand a TV program when they talk about the implications of science. It's very important for our society. So anything that we can do, that I can do personally, that exposes people when they're young to science, and mathematics, and engineering, just so they can be informed citizens, I consider important. Then secondly, those people who can be attracted and who have a talent for science and technology, I strongly think need to be exposed early on to scientists who actually practice in the field, so that they can understand that these indeed are people like them who have found a very
We have speed.
All right, we were at example number 2, or part 2 of this, getting kids interested so that they can become informed citizens, and then progressing to the next step.
Okay, well then the second step is the very real challenge that we have in attracting scientists and engineers into the profession. There are a large number of conflicting opportunities available, and I shouldn't say conflicting. There are a large number of opportunities available for our young people today, and that's good. It's marvelous. You know, they can be lawyers and doctors and investment bankers, and it is important that as a nation we continue to have a supply of talented scientists and engineers. So the second part of the equation, so to speak, is my desire to acquaint young people with the benefits of a career in science and technology. Then the third part of the equation is the dealing with the young people in terms of the importance of science and technology as a contribution to the nation's welfare. It's whether or not they become involved in industry, or in a place like Argonne, or in the Environmental Protection Agency, or in defense or health. It's important that they understand, in addition to the fact that these are interesting careers, that these have the potential of actually making a contribution to society. So sort of the 3 legs of the stool are important, to me anyway, in terms of providing the kind of entree into the knowledge that I think these young people need in order to make an appropriately informed decision.
How is that philosophy found structure here at Argonne?
Well, we have a number of programs. We have summer programs. We bring in talented kids from around the area that spend a couple of weeks here in the laboratory. We have a summer, actually we have an all year round, but especially in the summer program, to bring in high school science teachers so that they can work on some of the advanced equipment that we have here in the laboratory. We have pre-doctoral programs and postdoctoral programs. So when you look at the lab, you see continuously a number of these people. Now, in addition, I should say that we have during the year a number of specific special workshop sessions. We bus from the inner cities, kids out from the inner cities to take part in those programs. We have had a long, fruitful relationship with Bill Curtis on New Explorers. We're an intrinsic part of that program with Bill in terms of educating not only the kids in Illinois and in the cities, but in fact around the country. So we're very, very active in all of those programs.
We're going along the way that you were thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You've also done some work with bringing in minorities into the field. How has that worked?
Well, we certainly have done a lot in terms of bringing the inner city kids out to the lab. We also have sponsored or been part of the sponsorship of special minority programs with different schools in the area and around the country. We have a special program with Chicago State, for example. So the issue is one of attracting, I think, these kids into the field to begin with, so that they stay at the end of the pipe. Now, if we look at we say minorities and females. We've got a number of specific programs for women in the laboratory. We have a Women in Science program in the laboratory. And I think that we've certainly had a very good movement of women into the laboratory, and then upward movement of women in both science and management positions in the lab. The other minorities, the African American minority, Hispanic minorities, we're really still working at the beginning of the pipeline, or in the middle of the pipeline, so that we can actually help having people who come through the pipeline and provide opportunities for them in the laboratory.
Just straighten your tie.
Straighten my tie. Pull down my shirt.
I'm just going to duck out here and make sure that Dr. Drucker's on his way. I won't come back into. I
have just one or two more questions.
And the ultimate approval of whether my tie and shirt are right is my wife.
Oh, of course. Now the cable's going to have to.
Okay. Just one more question, and I think it goes back to education.
Mm-hmm.
That is, from where you sit, what do we as a country need to be doing better in the way of, we've heard we're not doing well in math and science for the kids. What could we be doing better?
Well, that's a tough question. The university system, I think, is fine. I guess one could always fine-tune it. I believe that the issues are certainly back in the secondary school system. And that varies whether we're in a very high in a neighborhood where there's a high income, in the suburbs where the educational opportunities are excellent. You can name the suburbs here in Chicago: Winnetka, Wilmette, Evanston, and compare those with the inner cities, whether it's Chicago or Los Angeles or New York, and the ability to provide the opportunity for the kids in those areas. Never mind getting into science and technologies, just the sheer opportunity for them to learn something such as the computer, how to deal with a computer, is a challenge for us in this country. So I can't do any better than to identify the problem. There are a lot of people who've worked on it, and I'm glad to make a contribution to it.
Upon learning that you were going to become a Lincoln laureate, I'd like to know what your feelings were about that. It's quite an august group.
Well, I have to start out by saying I was surprised. I was very surprised when I got a phone call telling me that I would be a Lincoln laureate. I knew a little bit about the organization, having acquaintance with other people who have been Lincoln laureates. So I guess I had two instantaneous reactions to it. One was one of surprise, and one was one of extreme flattery that I would become one. Flattered.
You're going to become director emeritus in a month or so.
Mm-hmm.
What's in the future for you? What do you look forward to doing?
Well, I would. There are some things that I plan to do. There are some opportunities, you might say, that have developed that will keep me involved in this science and society and technology that I have an interest in. I would certainly plan to remain intellectually active. I'm not so sure that I want the responsibility of running another 5,000-person organization again, but so I plan to remain active.
Is there anything that I might have missed? I know there's a lot I might have missed, but is there anything that comes to mind that you'd like to comment upon or back to you?
No, I think it's been a very thorough interview, and I again reiterate what I said earlier, and that is that science and having a career in science is a very rewarding career for me, and I can only encourage the young people to carefully look at that.
Let me just ask you a question like that. Why would you encourage a young person to become a scientist today?
Well, I still feel, as I did when I was young, and there's nothing that has changed my mind, that uncovering the secrets of nature and providing a societal value is very rewarding. If you have a desire to do that, the talent to do it. No doubt that the education required is demanding. The years that one has to spend getting the necessary background to do it. It is, though, an inherently rewarding occupation if you have the talent for it and the interest in it. I'm the last person to encourage someone to enter into it just because it's another job. I think that's a mistake for any field under any circumstances.
Really have to love it.
Well, you ought to love it. You ought to wake up in the morning and say, gee, this is interesting, and I'm really interested in what I'm up to. Now, you can't do it every day. It doesn't work that way. But so I have no compunction about encouraging people to seriously consider it, and I have no regrets myself.
Thank you very much.
Jack, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Well,